I'm Zonile Ngubeni and you're watching Joburg Today.
2 months ago, Parliament started the process to criminalise hate crimes and hate speech. Consequently, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development introduced the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, which makes it a criminal offence to make racist remarks. Now, just last month, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies instituted criminal charges against 3 people, Mohammed Hatia, Tazim Sidat and Matome Letswalo. These charges are extremely serious and no doubt constitutes racism and hate for this community. To discuss, I was joined in studio by Shaun Zagnoev, the National Chairman of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Shaun, welcome to Joburg Today TV. It's unfortunate that we have to meet under these circumstances. Serious hate speech crimes leveled against our Jewish community. I tried to get in touch with those 3 culprits. I managed to get in touch with one by the name of Tazim Sidat. Let's just listen to that conversation that we had. Okay, may I ask you what sparked this rhetoric? What was the conversation that preceded those comments that were posted?
I can send it to you and you can have a look.
Sure, but can you just tell me?
I don't mind sending it to you. I'm actually at work right now.
What was this conversation around? Was it around the Israel-Palestine crisis?
Yeah, something about that and Shaun Zagnoev.
But don't you think that this is out of hand, Tazim?
Yeah, no, it is,
between
yeah.
the Muslim and Jewish community, that it has to be, that reach this level of hate?
Yeah, no, definitely.
This is happening in a different region of the world. Do you have to, I mean, is it a position where Muslims need to hate all Jews because of what is going on?
No, definitely not, yeah.
So now they're proceeding with criminal charges against yourself and 2 other individuals. How are you going to proceed on your side? Are you remorseful?
Please, I can't give any comments right now.
No, but to be fair, I mean, this is a very serious crime.
Yeah, no, definitely.
2 months ago, Vicky Momberg was sentenced to 2 years in jail. And following that, there was a law that was passed in this country, and they're proceeding with criminal charges against you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, but I can't.
Don't you think in the
now.
South African spirit, that this hate speech needs to end? This prejudice against Jews, between Jews and Muslims, needs to end once and for all? This is a democratic country.
I was out of emotion. I said that, yes, but because there was some hateful comments that was passed down to us Muslims also.
Sure. So
I
noticed
not
that
against Palestinians, but against Muslims.
I noticed myself on social media that it was like a tennis match was going on following what happened with Shaun Zagnoev between Muslims and Jews, etc.
No, in this group I'm talking about, not about that group.
So this was on WhatsApp?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, you sound remorseful. You sound as if, you're sorry about what happened. But I think...
Yeah, no, definitely. I never meant... Most of my friends and customers that come on a daily basis are Jews. I never meant it to all Jews. It was just those Jews in that group.
So you were emotionally charged?
Some of them were actually saying things like, we're going to join the army and kill Palestinians. And how do you feel about that?
Sure, that's not fair as well.
I can send you all the screenshots if you like. What they did is they just took screenshots of what we said and they posted it.
Sure.
So makes us look really wrong.
Sure.
But yes, I don't mind doing a public apology. I don't mind doing all of that because I know what I did from my side was also wrong. I'm not saying I'm right.
Yeah.
But I feel like we also deserve an apology.
What do you make of that conversation, Shaun?
I think it's a very regrettable conversation that took place because I think that what people need to realize is that whatever they do, whatever they say, in today's times will be spread very widely. And sometimes out of context, sometimes in context. So if you say anything that is threatening to another group, that is automatically deemed to be hate speech, and that is a criminal act in South Africa today. There are appropriate consequences for that type of behavior. If it inspires others to act, then clearly it is problematic at its core. So we think it's really regrettable that this has occurred. It appears that there is regret from the perpetrator, from Tazim, and we need to latch onto that and we need to try and correct the events that have transpired. But something harmful has happened. something very harmful has happened. It's been spread very widely, and as I said, it could have very severe repercussions.
Sure.
So we both need to deal with the potential repercussions, we need to deal with the perpetrators, and we need to be mindful of the fact that the individual involved is showing some remorse.
Sure. I just want our viewers to actually take a look at some of those comments that were made. The first one was made by a person by the name of Letsowalo. And he says, at SAJBD, the Holocaust will be like a picnic when we are done with you, with all you Zionist bastards. The viewer can read the rest on the screen. In another tweet, he described Jews as vermin who Hitler should have exterminated completely, clearly threatening violent and racist, hateful comments leveled again against our Jewish community. Because in South Africa, if one community is affected negatively, it impacts all of us, doesn't it? I mean, this
Absolutely.
is a democratic country. Hate speech is a serious crime here.
Absolutely. Our Constitution enshrines the right for freedom of expression, but at the same time, it doesn't allow for hate speech. So often, when we curtail freedom of expression, hate speech is often the natural consequence of that. And I say that because these tweets, I think, followed the Sashi Naidu incident. And as you know, Sashi Naidu expressed views. She expressed her own personal views. And our Constitution protects freedom of expression, freedom of affiliation. And because of her views, she was clamped down, she was threatened, her life was threatened, her livelihood was threatened in such an aggressive and offensive way that then we almost limited her freedom of expression. We said to her, you're not allowed to hold these views. We're going to clamp down on you, we're going to curtail your ability to express yourself. The moment you do that, the moment you curtail freedom of speech, a very common consequence is that you see hate speech that then follows, because people are saying these people aren't allowed to hold certain viewpoints, and the alternative viewpoint must then be the correct viewpoint.
And that's incorrect,
it gives fuel to people to make hateful statements, and following from hateful statements, there's often harmful actions that follow. So we need to stamp down. We need to, in the first instance, we need to allow for freedom of expression. Sashi Naidu is allowed to say that she supports the Israeli position, even though she may not, but she's allowed to say that. She's allowed to say that she doesn't support the Hamas position. And for her to be threatened immediately after that gave rise to a whole series of events, and we're merely seeing the consequence of that. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that there aren't forces out there that are curtailing freedom of speech and pursuing their own agenda when it's not in the interests of South Africa generally.
Well, it certainly is interesting to have a Jewish voice and Jewish perspective on the Shashi Naidu, because we covered it quite extensively. We had BDS South Africa in here because we attended the press conference, and they validated that she was genuinely sorry, that she approached them, etc., but not wanting to get into the detail. I think the point is clear, that South Africa is a democratic country, and besides freedom of expression, I think it would be ludicrous for us to attack somebody on social media or any other platform if they support the DA and we do not support the DA, or we support the ANC. I mean, we don't see that happening. People socialize and interact in a free way here in South Africa. You have freedom of political association, and I think that's an important point to bring up, that we have freedom of political association. This conflict has been going on for 70 years. And every time something flares up, it affects the Muslim and Jewish communities all over the world. This is a madness. I've seen the social media comments, whether it's pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. I would rather say that it was almost like watching a tennis match. You know, when Herman Mashaba, the mayor, actually suspended or made a statement in council, because I was sitting in council at the time, that the DA supports a two-state solution. Immediately I received a comment that labeled Mayor Mashaba as a Jewish puppet. And I said, hang on here, you're not here to understand why he made that decision. Okay, avoid making general sweeping statements without really putting things into context. It's a multi-party government. He faced opposition, and she was not in a position to say that on behalf of the city of Johannesburg. And that suspension was only to understand what happened, to actually further interrogate that, because it's a sensitive issue. When she was suspended, it appeared that the Muslim community was appeased with that. But when there was an apology from Pope Palazzi, I did receive a comment from a Jewish friend of mine, actually. He just merely expressed reservation that maybe, concern that, it seems as if people hate Jews, and that Mayor Mashaba is supporting Hamas. Okay, so again, I had to put it into context to say, let's not blow things out of proportion. But the point I'm making is, and I'm sorry I'm going on, because I think it's interesting for us to discuss this openly, and I'm commenting from a social media perspective. It's a tennis match. If you support one, if you support one party, then, you know, you are going to be severely whiplashed on social media. And if your leader says something, then you're assuming that he supports the opposition. It's actually a state of madness. This is happening in the Middle East. It's tearing our local communities apart here.
Noshina, I think you've described it perfectly. You know, we have a conflict that's taking place 12,000 kilometers away. It's a conflict that many great minds around the world, many great leaders
We're all concerned about it, but should it tear us apart?
Absolutely right. So that conflict needs to stay there. We need to influence it by sending our people there to try and facilitate resolution, because we've got great people in South Africa that have resolved global conflicts, but they've resolved them by engaging with the parties. So we need to take some of our pedigree, some of our skills, which we've developed and honed in South Africa in terms of conflict resolution, and take those to Israel and try and assist them to resolve the Palestine-Israel debacle, because it is a debacle. The Israelis are suffering, the Palestinians are suffering. But you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be importing that conflict into South Africa and dividing South Africa, tearing ourselves apart. Sashi Naidu is just a wonderful ambassador for South Africa. To see her in tears and to see the BDS movement hovering over her and gloating that look what we've done, we've now got ourselves somebody else to represent us, that doesn't create harmony in our community. That's not good for us. That merely creates division. It creates unhappiness, it creates hatred, it creates tweets, social media statements of the like that you've seen. So we can't allow for that conflict to divide us and tear us apart. You know, I remember fondly, if I may say, when I turned 13, I had my bar mitzvah. I went to the Oriental Plaza and got my bar mitzvah suit. And I remember Solly, who served me there, and it was just, he served all the Jewish clients. So Jews and Muslims have natural affiliation to each other. We shouldn't bring that conflict and insert it into South Africa and divide ourselves, because we've got such major problems within South Africa. We need to use our collective resources and our collective effort to solve our own problems. Let's work together. Let's not bring issues. You know, BDS is a single agenda movement that seeks to divide us in South Africa, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. If I may give one more example now.
Sure, please go ahead.
I'm hogging the floor now. You did previously. So by way of an example, in 2014, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, which is the organization that I represent, had its conference, annual conference, and this represents Jewish interests in South Africa. BDS mounted a campaign to ensure that no South African government officials could attend that event. Now, that's an absurdity. Similarly, there was a concert at Wits, BDS outside the concert hall saying, "Shoot the Jew." So this is an absurdity. We shouldn't allow this. We should stamp it out. We should say that we as South Africans have got big issues. Let's not import a conflict from 12,000 kilometers away and cause that to tear us apart. It's just madness.
I don't want to get into the shoot the Jew, but I clarify that shoot the Jew incident with Mohammed Desai, who had an explanation for that and said that he doesn't even know how to sing. But the point you're making is an important one. The more we go on and on over this issue, instead of focusing on social cohesion here, which will have ripple effects, the stronger our community is, regardless of what the real issues are, regardless of how we are divided on the approach to resolving this or what the solution is for Israel-Palestine. If we can solidify ourselves as South Africans and live within the parameters of what constitutes a democratic South Africa, and be willing to leave our political affiliations as a personal choice, I think we can move forward.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I think that we need to learn from incidents such as this. Yeah. That as these things emerge, we need to stamp them out. We saw with the Vicky Momberg event, we saw with the Sparrow event prior to that, we've seen that with Masuku from Kasatu, who was engaged in hate speech as well and received a censure from the High Court. We need to learn from these events and we need to ensure that they don't happen. We mustn't have people that are fueling them. So two things need to happen. The first is that those people that are seeking for these things to happen need to be brought into line. And the perpetrators of these events need to be made to know that what they've done is unacceptable and they need to be brought back into check.
Are you going to go all the way with these criminal charges to court?
Yeah, so we've pressed criminal charges. In many senses, we lose control of the process because if the criminal charge has been pressed, then it's the prosecutor that then takes this matter and proceeds with it. Understand that in certain circumstances we can withdraw the charges, but our intention is to ensure that perpetrators of hate crimes, of hate speech, are brought to book, because if we allow it to go unchecked, the ramifications could be quite severe. We recently saw, as you know, those 2 terrible murders that took place at 2 mosques in KwaZulu-Natal and the Cape. So we can't allow for those type of things. If we open the floodgates, then we can't control the consequences. So we need to really, any incidents of this nature, we will use our full rights as South African citizens. We'll use the full might of the law to ensure that perpetrators understand the consequences of their actions. So yes, it is our intention to take this all the way. We've also engaged with the Equality Court because this is a hate crime and it falls foul of the equality of the Constitution. And therefore, these individuals are in breach of the Constitution, and therefore we're going to be taking them to the Equality Court to deal with it in that manner as well.
What do you, again, coming back to Tazim Sidat saying that he is willing to make a public apology, how will you receive that?
I'm very reassured by that. Can I just add something else which I think is very interesting to you and to the audience? We received a call from a Mr. Hatia. I don't want to say his first name because I don't want him to be subject to any challenge.
Sure.
And he said to us that his name is Mr. Hatia, and he's got members of his family also called Muhammad Hatia. But they aren't the individuals involved, and he wanted to express extreme regret and remorse at the events that have taken place. He is a Muslim. He's got Jewish friends, Jewish customers, and a very strong connection and relationship with the Jewish community. And he wanted us to make sure that we were aware that he wasn't the guilty party, or his family wasn't the guilty party, because he abhors this kind of behavior. So there are a lot of good people out there. Earlier you said that the Muslims will be placated by what Herman Mashaba said. I don't think that's correct. I think it was the BDS movement was placated by when Herman Mashaba retracted. I think the Muslim community, in essence, is not one seeking conflict. So the vast majority of Muslims in South Africa see this as being very offensive. And I'm very pleased that Tazim himself recognized that what he has done was a mistake and could have potential disastrous consequences, and that he's reaching out to try and resolve this matter. And it's our preference for this matter to be resolved. It's our preference for this matter to be resolved in a way that others recognize that this type of behavior needs to be stamped out. So as long as it's a genuine contrition, a genuine regret, genuine remorse, and he's prepared to apologize publicly and whatever else is entailed, we would obviously wish to engage with him and understand what his perspective is.
I think a lot of things get blown out of context, especially when it's happening around the Israel-Palestine conflict. People become highly emotionally charged. And I think that if we can work together and drive forward social cohesion, I think it's needed between the Jewish and the Muslim communities, then we can walk together towards finding a solution united that is to the benefit of Israelis and Palestinians.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Do you think that is a long shot? I don't think it's a long shot. I believe in ripple effects. And I believe that we need to have a shift in approach to how we deal with this collectively. And certainly this is a big wake-up call for all of us. I mean, hate speech, social media, attacks, all of this, it's an indication of how people are reacting to the situation right now. And I think it's a wake-up call. It should be seen as a wake-up call in terms of how this is dividing our society. More than 70 years. We cannot predict when this conflict is going to be resolved. Are we going to keep going on and on for decades in this manner as Muslim and Jewish communities? This is counterproductive. If you start at home and you build social cohesion and we have mature conversations, then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
You're absolutely right. You know, if we look at South Africa, as I said earlier, South Africa has a unique pedigree. We resolved what was considered one of the globally intractable problems with apartheid. We achieved the impossible. So we can do miracles in South Africa. And the way we did that ultimately was by getting the parties to engage. So we need people to talk, we need people to put aside their differences, because there are differences. I have a view about Israel and Palestine, My Muslim friends have a different view. We work together in the same office and we get on very well because we recognize that there's strength in unity and there is diversity.
In that context, I'm sure you have a view about the ANC and the DA that's different from some of your Jewish friends or Muslim friends. So how should that really impact on our friendships and relationships? Because political affiliation is a personal matter altogether. It's a democratic right in South Africa, but I think we need to be mature enough to talk about it openly and not let that really impact on the quality of our business relationships, our friendships, our relationships in general. Or if you do have serious prejudices, you need to actually respect that your prejudices could lead to a crime like hate speech.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be able to understand that that's not okay in our society.
Absolutely right. You know, if you look at all the global conflicts out there, if we divided South Africans along those lines, we'd be at each other's throats all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever it might be, if we take the Syria conflict, or we take the conflict in Iran, or we take the conflict in Turkey, or we take views about Trump, if people's different views cause them to hate each other, we'd really tear each other apart. So we really can't go there. And this, for me, is a wake-up call. This is an important event that people recognize that by putting out what he believes, that as an example, that this was an innocent statement that was emotionally, he was provoked to do that. People need to realize that these can have far-reaching
consequences,
effects.
yeah.
And therefore, we need to try and find the common denominator to unite us, because there is a huge common denominator, and that is the interests of South Africa. The question that we
need to
always
stop
need to ask.
stereotyping Muslims and Jews
Absolutely
around this
right.
conflict.
Absolutely right.
And the moment we step out of line and we don't deal with prejudice, it can lead to all sorts of other consequences.
The first question
We
that we
have
always...
to confront prejudice.
Yes.
Yes.
The first question that we always have to ask ourselves is, what is good for South Africa? Because we South African citizens, our loyalty lies with South Africa. What is good for South Africa? Is saying I hate Muslims or I hate Hindus or I hate Jews, is that good for South Africa because of the conflict that is very remote? That cannot be good for South Africa. We must leave that conflict there, and we must say to ourselves, all this effort, all this energy, all this Sashi Naidu nonsense where we bring it to tears, all of this is wasted energy, and all of this creates conflict. We must try and move that away, not sweep it under the carpet, but we must dismiss it and take that energy that we have and channel it.
Learn from it
And channel it to say, let's really help each other to make South Africa the country it needs to be, because we have monumental challenges in South Africa.
Yep.
These sideshows in the South African context can't dominate. We need our energy and resources to address our real issues right now.
Sure, that's fair enough. It was wonderful, inspiring speaking to you, and I sincerely hope that our message will be well received. Whether it is or isn't, I think this is a good opportunity for us to appeal to South Africans to actually work towards what I'm calling for is social cohesion.
Yes, absolutely, Nashina. And I think that the media has a unique position to try and build that social cohesion. So I really appreciate the conversation we've had, because I think it is sending the right messages.
And we will be having a lot more conversations.
Thank you.
More positive, uplifting ones. Thank you so much for your time, Shaun.
Thank you, Nashina.